And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Hello, I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska aviation weather outlook on this Monday, December 16th, 2024. And the outlook will be as we head into midweek, Tuesday and on Wednesday. Of note, we have a couple of low pressure systems coming up out of the North Pacific that are just going to kind of pinwheel or dumbbell over the Aleutians as we go through midweek. And then by the time we get into Wednesday morning, low pressure will be coming up out of the North Pacific, impacting Haida Gwaii and especially the southern parts of the Panhandle. And then there'll be yet another North Pacific low pullback toward Kodiak Island late in the week. So again, we're going to be watching these North Pacific lows. Certainly the weather's going to be active at times along the Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, and all along the Gulf Coast as we head toward the solstice and Christmas holiday. Meanwhile, the interior is going to see the snows begin to diminish. The snow that fell there late last week and over the weekend is going to begin to diminish, and just general high pressure is going to be holding in place over the interior, northern parts of the state, thanks to high pressure centered over northwest Canada. One thing, though, is we'll continue to see much of this week rather brisk polar easterly winds along the Beaufort Sea, Chukchi Sea coastline. So there is the potential for additional periods of blowing and drifting snow with reduced visibilities from those strong polar easterly winds. But on Tuesday morning, we find IFR conditions here over the Alaska Peninsula, back toward the eastern Aleutians, central western Aleutians, and out over the central Bering. For Tuesday afternoon, there is a frontal system across draped in this manner where we find IFR conditions, central Bering, along areas of the southwest coast, Nunavik Island, especially Kuskokwim Bay, Bristol Bay, and into Kodiak Island, Lower Cook Inlet. And then on Wednesday morning, we'll continue to see those that area of IFR just kind of hold fast over southwest Gulf, Kodiak Island, upper half of the Alaska Peninsula, Kuskokwim and Bristol Bays along parts of the lower Yukon coast, all the way up to St. Lawrence Island and just south of the Bering Strait, and then also continuing out across much of the Aleutian chain, especially the central western Aleutians. And by Wednesday afternoon, not a whole lot changes. We do find some MVFR conditions up into the Panhandle along the Gulf Coast, maybe a little IFR right along the west side of Cook Inlet, and then continuing over the Alaska Peninsula, St. Lawrence Island, and then spotty out through the Bering Sea, but pretty extensive again along the Aleutian chain for Wednesday afternoon. So pass conditions on Tuesday, Anaktuvik Pass will generally see VFR conditions prevail. So will Adigan Pass up there in the east central Brooks Range as we bring it down toward the Alaska Range with that frontal boundary coming northward. Easterly, southeasterly flow ahead of it. We expect MVFR conditions to become IFR during the daytime on Tuesday. Same thing, Rainy Pass, MVFR becoming IFR. And then Windy Pass, MVFR conditions may actually give way to VFR conditions on Tuesday. However, as we go further east, Isabel and Mentasta Passes there through the eastern half of the Alaska Range are expecting MVFR conditions Tuesday. Tanita Pass, VFR may be early in the day, giving way to MVFR conditions. And generally speaking, MVFR conditions are expected to prevail across Portage Pass. And then in the far north end of the Panhandle, Chilkoot and White, we'll end up seeing VFR conditions on Tuesday. Now, looking at the freezing level, the surface freezing line pushes down toward Kuskokwim, Bristol Bay, and then all along the Gulf Coast into the outer portion of the Panhandle Tuesday morning. Freezing levels aloft, there's no really mild air aloft, a little bit south of Haida Gwaii, 4,000 and 6,000 feet, but nothing like what we get when we have the strong low pressure systems with those strong fronts. Sometimes we get those freezing levels upwards of 8,000, 10,000 feet, but nothing like that. This is a pretty in terms of milder air aloft, it's pretty chilly across the mainland. And where we do find some clouds that are producing any precipitation or have the moisture structure to produce icing, we find areas here, the western Gulf above 4,000 feet, and then extending back out here over the central Bering, a broad area of moderate icing possible in the clouds there above 4,000 feet. Upper level jet stream winds at 30,000 feet. Strongest jet core coming in from the southwest here, the North Pacific up into British Columbia, Vancouver, upwards of 125 knots. Back out across Kuskokwim and Bristol Bays, the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, we have a southeasterly flow of 70 to as high as 85 knots there south of Nunavik Island, and then up across the interior north of the Alaska Range, a west-northwest flow of 60 knots. At 9,000 feet or 700 millibars, a broad belt of winds off the U.S. CONUS and Vancouver Island, southwest flow upwards of 50, 70 knots. But back here across southwest Alaska, the southeast corner of the Bering, including Kuskokwim, Bristol Bays, there is a southeasterly flow of 45 to 55 knots. And then finally bringing it down to 3,000 feet, we find a broad area of just kind of southeasterly flow here over southwest mainland and then along the eastern Bering in excess of 50 knots. We also find at 3,000 feet some brisk southeast to east winds, 35 knots along the Beaufort Sea coast. And then with an area of low pressure coming up from the south, we could see some stronger winds around Haida Gwaii, 50 to 65 knots in that circulation. So the greatest threat for turbulence on Tuesday will be over areas of the southwest mainland, especially along Kuskokwim, Bristol Bays, the Alaska Peninsula, extending down across the Aleutian chain, especially back toward the central Aleutians. And that turbulence would be surface to 3,000 to surface to 4,000 feet. Now in the far north, we have those brisk polar easterly, so surface to 3,000 feet. There could be some isolated moderate turbulence there along the coast. And then finally, southern part of the Panhandle, Prince of Wales Island, Dixon Entrance, Haida Gwaii could see moderate turbulence on Tuesday, surface to 6,000 feet.